Well, I'm sorry a broken hip kept me from being in Boston for this great celebration of Tom Edgar's 80th birthday. And so I wanted to reflect as a student and a colleague the impact that Tom Edgar had on my life. Well, Tom's been working a lot recently in the field of smart manufacturing. And so one of the notions in smart manufacturing is to create a digital twin. And most often you'd think of this as a reduced order digital twin that tries to capture some of the main aspects of the physical system, but doesn't necessarily capture all the key aspects of the physical system. And so I'm trying to argue that I've made a feeble attempt to be a reduced order digital twin model of Tom Edgar. And so what I'm doing here is I'm going to examine Tom Edgar's joy or love of life, and we have three primary topics involved: a healthy body, sound mind, to collaborate in research and education, and to enjoy professional activities. So one question is, how did I choose Tom Edgar as an advisor? So I was working in the refining industry on the Gulf Coast of Texas in the early 1980s, serving as a typical process engineer, and the union went on strike on two different occasions. And so engineers and management have to operate the process plant while the union's out on strike. And so that's where I really started understanding the importance of automation and control. It made me want to do my work in advanced modeling and control in graduate school. And so after 2.5 years, I was deciding on graduate school. I said, where do I want to go? Who do I want to work with? And so I tried to learn who the leaders in the field were. And so I looked at Texas and Tom Edgar, and I was just reflecting about my experience with control in refining. And I said, man, if we could only control linear 8-stage binary distillation columns better with bang-bang control, we could really solve our current energy crisis. And so that led me to choose UT Austin and Tom as my advisor. So I'll first describe kind of the research group environment that Tom had at that time at UT. And so we had the EP Shock laboratories that Tom's research group was in, and we were basically up in the attic and had, around 16 to 20 different desks. And so Tom would return from conferences. He'd walk through this bullpen in the shock labs. He'd drop papers from these conferences and then request us to quickly become an expert on the paper. And then he'd have weekly group meetings. And so that was usually one graduate student was making a presentation. So Tom would walk in at the beginning of the presentation with a stack of mail. He'd have this furious opening of the mail as he went through it. And then all of a sudden, the room would fall quiet as Edgar fell asleep, just long enough so that he would awaken just in time as the grad student was finishing up and ask many pertinent questions and then refer to work being done by Seaborg or McAvoy students on similar topics. Now at that time, we would hear rumors of noon basketball games that Tom was involved in, but none of us really dared to actually go and try and participate in those games. Now one summer though, we did ask him to pitch on our grad student softball team, and so we had several people here. So I was involved. Doyle Broom was kind of the manager of the team. Walt Wiskowski, who worked with Jim Rawlings, was on the team. And I should note that Doyle Broom was probably the only graduate student to receive tenure at UT Austin. But we definitely enjoyed that, and it kind of made me think, when I went to RPI, I actually played softball on the grad student team at RPI. But then further, so maybe this illustrates the nimbleness of a reduced order model, as I also began pole vaulting with the track team at RPI. So during my years as a grad student at Texas, Tom Ed led a very vibrant group, a lot of different grad students. So you can see the names of the students and the titles of the dissertations written during the time that I was there. It involved a lot of different topics, from underground coal gasification to semiconductor device manufacturing to pressure swing absorption to help pilots with masks. And so a very exciting time, but it made me understand that it was important to consider research collaborations. And so again, here I'm listing the different topics, and Tom has worked obviously on a lot more topics than the ones listed there. But the notion is to be adaptable in research. And essentially you can think of everything as a systems and control problem. So similarly, when I went to RPI, I went around campus, met a lot of people, and I began a collaboration with an anesthesiologist. And we started working on problems involving blood pressure and cardiac output in surgical care patients. And you can see here, we actually did experimental work on animals. You may recall there were a number of challenge problems that were issued in the 1990s, and I had proposed the mongrel dog challenge problem, but it seemed to never really take root. I don't think anybody else actually jumped in to that research arena, and it's likely that Tom never had a dog with a biosketch in any of his published articles. Now, after I did some work in anesthesia, I started working in diabetes for around 15 years. And so, like Tom, I saw the power of having these major collaborations. So I was able to work with clinicians at these different schools, with engineers at these different schools. And the people in red spent time in my lab at RPI. I don't know if Frank Doyle is in the audience, but we had nice collaborations. And so, I really enjoyed the tremendous effort put into developing a closed-loop artificial insulin delivery system. Now, Tom has worked a lot in smart manufacturing. So almost 20 years ago, he led an NSF workshop with Jim Davis that led to the notion of a smart plant. And I was invited to participate in that workshop, and we really got a lot out of it. And a few years later, he and Jim Davis had this vision for a smart manufacturing leadership coalition. And then that was followed by years later, during the Obama administration, to the creation of SESME as a Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute, and RPI became a regional center for that. Now, this slide shows just the small branch of the Edgar academic tree that are students that worked with me on their PhDs. And you can see a number of faculty involved: Brian Ofterheide, Vinay Prasad, Deepak Nagrath, Daniel Hausman, who's now at Tulane University. But the students I've shown in red here are 4 that were directly funded by this smart manufacturing initiative. So he certainly had a major impact on my ability to fund graduate students in that area. Now, Tom has played an active role in many professional societies. The American Automatic Control Council, or A²C², as we refer to it. Tom was the AICHE director, then a finance chair for an ACC, the general chair for an American Control Conference, and then he served as president of the A²C². Now, when he was president, they were coming up with committees for upcoming conferences, and so the general chair for the 1991 American Control Conference was going to be Tim Johnson from General Electric, and he was looking for a finance chair. And Tom said, well, Wayne Beckett is close by at RPI, so he might be a good person for you to have as your finance chair. And so sure enough, Tim Johnson asked me to do that, and so I became a finance chair for that ACC. I served, like Tom, as an AICHE director on the A²C². I became a general chair for the 2003 ACC, which is in Denver, and I've shown photos below of that. Also, I served as president, like Tom did, and then I'm still serving as the secretary of the organization. Similarly, AICHE, Tom has played a number of very important roles, going from second to first vice chair to chair of the CAS division. And then, something I didn't do, he became vice president and president of overall AICHE. But as a digital twin, I followed in his footsteps through the CAS division, and then I became a CAS division programming chair. So that's related to the session we had earlier today with Jeff Sorolla, who also spent time as a CAS division programming chair. Computer aids for chemical engineering. Tom has been very involved in that society, serving as a trustee, as vice president, president, and then for a very long time as the executive director. And so here I have a photo of him receiving an award for the time that he spent as an executive director of CASH. Now similarly, 2010, I became a trustee and then vice president and president of CASH. I have not taken on the responsibility of executive director, however. This is a set of pictures from the celebration of CASH's 50th anniversary in Colorado a few years ago. Tom was one of our keynote speakers, and again, this also ties into kind of the session we had earlier with Jeff Sorolla today. Now, one thing that Jim and Dale Seaborg were known for at these series of chemical process control conferences, which were sponsored by CASH. They sponsor a number of other conferences, but they put together these awards, and this is the one in 2001 that Jim Rawlings was the general chair for. And you can see that they allowed me to be the digital twin in training, if you will, trying to collect data and help me along with these awards in real time. Now, we had FOCAPO CPC 2023 just a few years ago, and when we were there, Tom Badwell introduced me to the notion of ChatGPT. I was not familiar with it, but I was very intrigued by everything that he taught me about it. And so I had this idea, why don't we write a rap about FOCAPO CPC 2023 in the style of Professor Thomas Edgar? And Jim and Tom, they're saying, oh, yeah. They encouraged me, said, yeah, that's a great idea. You know, then they're under their breath saying, yeah, you make the fool of yourself. It just reminded me of they're kind of like the kids when I was 7 years old. If I said, hey, why don't I jump my bicycle across that creek? And they'd say, hey, yeah, Wayne, that's a great idea. Why don't you do that? And so I gave the information to ChatGPT, and so it created kind of this verse response type of thing, and I'm not going to go through that again, but I have to admit that Tom did follow up. So in the actual recording, you hear Tom Edgar supplying the chorus for this rap that was created. And then I have kind of the screenshots of me making my feeble attempt to be a rap artist. And then Tom noted that there actually is a rap artist known as Lil Wayne, so I guess I can't use that since it's copyrighted. Also at FOCAPO CPC a few years ago, Tom Edgar arrived a little bit later than the rest of us, but within like minutes of arriving, he gave us like 5 different ideas for awards to give at the presentation at the banquet a few nights later. So the final thing that I'm going to reflect on is when I was a graduate student, it was always clear that it was important to Tom to be back home, to be with his family. So at the end of the day, he was definitely leaving his office and heading back home. And so I've got some photographs of him in his younger days with his young kids. So he's taking advantage of his kids falling asleep, and he's using it as his personal nap time, I guess keeping the cat warm as well. And so similarly, when my son was born, Brendan, I took advantage of nap time, and I would take a nap with Brendan on my chest as well. So again, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person for this presentation, but Tom has certainly influenced my teaching, research, and professional society leadership. These 43 years certainly have flown by, but I appreciate the major impact these had on my life and career. So I hope you have a good last of this session, and I'm sure I'll be in touch with you with more advice even in retirement. Take care.